Hi, this is Jules. Welcome to this Forest Walk and Chat. This video uses some terms and concepts that I've introduced in other videos, so I'll put links to the Start Here and glossary playlists in the description below for ease of access. In this one, I'm going to cover a very simple and powerful shadow work technique, which is how I like my tools, simple and powerful. I'm going to format this one as a workshop too, so if you want to, you can use this video as a tool to actually work through the technique so you can try it out for yourself. If you're using the video that way, just pause after each question and answer for yourself before continuing. You can write or type your answers so you can look at them later, or just say them or think them, whatever works for you. If you want help finding shadows to work on, see the video titled "What are shadows and why bother doing shadow work?" for a whole list of ideas. I give plenty of directions and suggestions in this video. As always, if your inner guidance has a better idea, follow that instead. And if this isn't your first time through this video and you want to just skip ahead to the workshop bit, you can click on the chapter conveniently named Workshop. This shadow work technique is called the 3-2-1 process. I got it from Ken Wilber's book, The Religion of Tomorrow. I'll link that below too. Here's the basic premise. As I mentioned in the What Are Shadows video, a shadow is basically just some development work that you've been avoiding doing. One way of looking at this is that instead of doing the development work, what's happening is that you're dissociating from that part of yourself in some way and saying, that's not me. You might be pushing it away from yourself and projecting it onto other people, or you might be suppressing it so it turns into this sub-personality that wreaks havoc at inopportune times, or all the time. Here's an example. Red stage often gets villainized in modern cultures, so a lot of people have red shadows. Red stage is about discovering personal power, agency, and assertiveness. Learning to stand up for yourself, to advocate for yourself, to set boundaries, etc. It can be really easy to judge this assertiveness as being an asshole, and then turn around and say, I'm not an asshole, I'm a nice person. Bam, shadow. By dissociating the part of yourself that can be assertive, you don't properly develop that part, and instead, either you end up projecting it so that it looks like everyone else is an asshole, or you suppress it and you end up with this really angry or controlling subpersonality that you ironically can't control, or something of that ilk. In any case, what you end up with is a part of yourself that you're treating as though it isn't you. Instead of being healthfully integrated into your first person I or mine identity, you're viewing it as a second person you, or a third person it, he, she, they, etc. In the case of projection, it becomes a second person you, or a third person it, he, she, or they, or whatever, out there. In the case of a subpersonality, it becomes this third person it that you don't feel like you have any control over. That's the key. A shadow feels like a problem that's happening to you. It doesn't feel like you have any control over it, but it's actually a part of you. Imagine if you kept punching yourself in the face, but you didn't recognize that your fist was part of you. You'd be in pain, you'd probably be complaining about it, and you'd want it to stop, but you wouldn't have any idea how to make it stop. You wouldn't have any control over it. It would just be this problem that you didn't have any control over, but no one else would be able to make it stop either, because in reality, you're doing it to yourself. The moment that you realize that your fist is part of you, you wouldn't wonder anymore how to make it stop. You just stop. And that's what happens when you integrate a shadow. You recognize that it's actually you, and if you were hurting yourself with this shadow, you naturally just stop. So based on this premise, the solution is to reintegrate the shadow, to turn it by stages from third person dissociated it, he, she, or they, to a second person you, and finally to a first person I or mine. That's why this is called the 3-2-1 process. It goes from 3, third person, to 2, second person, to 1. first person. The formula for this process has 4 steps. Step 1, find it. This is where you shine a light on the shadow. You haul it out of its corner in the dark and drag it into the light where you can see it clearly. This step actually turns out to bear a lot of resemblance to the formula I described in the How to Deal with Emotions video. There is an underlying reason for this, but I'll leave it to you to explore why and discover that for yourself. Step 2 is face it. This is where you begin to turn the shadow from a third person it, he, she, or they into a second person you. Then step 3, talk with it. This is where you really deeply get to know and understand this shadow as a living, breathing second person you. And finally, step 4, be it. You finally turn the shadow from second person to first person and you become it, resulting in a newly integrated, more whole self. Now I'm going to go through these steps in more detail, presenting the kinds of questions you can ask yourself for each one. This is the part of the video that you can use as a workshop. Remember, you can just pause the video after each question to give yourself time to answer. It's also a good idea to reserve some time afterward for processing and self-care as necessary, since shadow work can be intense sometimes. So, step 1, find it. Take as neutral a perspective as you can. No judgment about good or bad, not trying to fix anything. And observe this shadow. Just notice everything you can about it. How does the energy of this shadow feel in your body? For example, where do you feel it in your body? What size, color, shape, texture, etc.? What physical states do you tend to experience with this shadow? Increased heart rate, shallow breathing, headaches, certain muscles tightening, etc. What do you usually do when this shadow comes up? What seems to trigger this shadow? And what seems to soothe it? And remember, no judgment here. Treat it like you're watching a scientific documentary. Then step 2, face it. Either physically or in your mind, place an empty chair in front of you and put the problem in the chair. How does it appear? Is it a specific person? A group of people? A monster? A blob of energy? An image? A symbol? A word? A scene? However it shows up is exactly how it's supposed to show up, even if it's not what you expected. Let your subconscious guide you. Then step 3, talk with it. Now you really get to know and understand this shadow as a second person you. Ask it questions and listen carefully to what it says. If it doesn't know the answer to a question, ask it to guess. For example, you can ask it questions like, why are you here? Why are you doing this to me? What do you want? Where did you come from? How long have you been here? And let it ask you questions too and answer them. Watch carefully how it responds to your answers. You can even ask it what it thinks of your answers. And finally, step 4, be it. Now switch roles. Switch into the role of being the shadow now, sitting in its chair, facing your normal self in the other chair. How does it feel to be the shadow? How does it see you in the other chair? What do you look like to it? Be willing to be with however this shows up. It might be a really nasty monster, and you have to be willing to be it and to feel what it's like to be it, and to have all these really nasty thoughts and emotions, and to see yourself in the other chair exactly how it sees you, which might not be flattering. And now, have the conversation again, this time answering as the shadow. The questions and answers might turn out to be the same, or they might turn out to be different this time. Either way is fine. This process can have a variety of different outcomes, depending on what kind of shadow it is, and also how deep it goes. By the end of the process, you might merge with the shadow, or it might merge with you, and you are able to re-own this part of yourself. Or you might realize that the shadow's voice is actually someone else's voice, like a parent's, a sibling's, or an early friend's, and not yours at all, in which case, recognizing that allows you to let it go. Recognizing what is not you is also an important part of development. Or it might not feel quite right or complete, in which case, going through the steps again can allow you to go deeper and get at another layer. If you go through these steps a couple of times and you're not making any headway, it might help to sleep on it and try it again afresh the next day. If after a couple of days you're still not making any progress, that's the point at which, if I were in your shoes, I might elicit the assistance of a good therapist. Regardless of what your results are, I find it can be very helpful to do a little check-in afterward. How do you feel now? How does the world look now? How do other people look now? How do you see yourself now? Sometimes, when I think I haven't made any progress, when I do this little check-in, I find that things have profoundly shifted anyway, even though I wasn't aware of it. Also, sometimes shadow work can bring up some intense stuff, and it isn't always predictable which shadows are going to be intense to work through. I've had seemingly giant shadows turn out to be minor molehills, and I've had what looked like a minor shadow reveal major trauma that I wasn't aware I had. So some self-care might be in order. And it might be helpful to journal about the process and your results. However you and your inner guidance decide your aftercare should look, I'll leave you to it.